I will always be Spider-Man.
Hello guys, welcome back to Rewind Reviews. Today we're going to be doing a movie that came out in 2012. It's a movie that I've been looking forward to talking about for a little while, so I'm just going to channel my inner Bruce Campbell for a second. We're going to be talking about The Amazing Spider-Man! Yes, I know Bruce Campbell isn't in this one, but I just think it's the only opportunity for me to actually do that. Directed by the aptly named Mark Webb and written by James Vanderbilt, Alvin Sargent and Steve Kloves. The first reboot based on the Marvel Comics character Spider-Man, this 2012 reboot focuses on a teenage Peter Parker as he tries to uncover the mystery surrounding his parents' death. But after being bitten by a genetically enhanced spider, he's drawn into conflict with a character called the Lizard. The movie stars Andrew Garfield, Emma Stone, Rhys Ifans, Sally Fields, Irfan Khan, Martin Sheen and Dennis Leary. You know, it's really weird to think that this only came out 10 years after the Tobey Maguire movies debuted, which is a ridiculously short time for a reboot, but Batman's kind of claimed that title at this point. But this is such a strange experience because they were essentially trying to modernise the Spider-Man franchise. It's weirdly quite different from what we had got, but it's quite similar at the same time. So my feelings toward this movie have been quite complicated over the years, and it is something that I have wanted to talk about for a while. I was a big fan of the Tobey Maguire Sam Raimi trilogy growing up because they're a big part of my childhood. I was really looking forward to seeing what they were going to do with a Spider-Man 4, which was debuted for, well, which was scheduled for I think May 2011. Somewhere along the line Sony sort of were trying to push for the movie to be released a lot sooner. I think that they weren't giving them a lot of time to really sort of develop a story that Sam Raimi and his company were really happy with, based on the reaction that Spider-Man 3 had gotten, because that was by far one of the weakest Spider-Man movies that we had. It really did sort of put a lot of pressure on them, and Sam Raimi eventually just ended up walking away from it. I don't know whether he walked or whether he was fired or what. I don't know the entire story, but eventually, yeah, Sam Raimi ends up leaving, and Tobey Maguire basically said, well, if he's not part of this, I'm not part of this. He left. So Sony basically had the option of either doing a sequel with new people or doing a full reboot, and based on things that I have heard, it sounded like they had actually been planning on doing some sort of reboot for a little while, so we eventually got this version instead. I remember being quite upset about that as well. I remember, I think it was on the radio or something, I just remember hearing the news about saying, oh, the Spider-Man 4 is being scrapped and everyone's kind of walked away from it. No, why is this happening? In the long run, I think it has worked out for the best, because we have got some great stories from how he's being integrated into the MCU and stuff like that, but it really depends on what you really want from Spider-Man, whether or not you're going to be happy that it's kind of gone its own way now, or would you have preferred that they've stayed with the Sam Raimi movies. I'm really stumbling over my words today, guys, sorry about that. When I say that this is a reboot movie, I quite literally mean that, because this kind of starts everything from scratch. It's completely dismisses everything that's happened previously, and it retells the origin story in a slightly more modern way, but a slightly more updated, high-tech interpretation. I've always kind of seen the Andrew Garfield movies and the Tobey Maguire movies as very different things, because I've always felt like the Andrew Garfield ones were a lot more tech-based and a lot more sciencey, whereas the Tobey Maguire ones are a lot more like fantasy and romantic. It really depends on your preference on which ones you sort of prefer, but I do appreciate that they had tried doing something a little bit different, but I don't think that having it be a complete reboot was a really good idea. And to this day, people are still debating on which interpretation is the best. For me, I've never really had a problem with these different interpretations, because there's so many different versions of this character in the comics alone. I mean, Miles Morales and Miguel O'Hara and all these other different characters, and Spider-Gwen, and all the ones that appear in the Spider-Verse. There's so many different interpretations of this character that I've never really been too bothered by having these vastly different interpretations on screen. As long as they stay true to who the character is, I'm more than fine with it. So playing Spider-Man this time around is Andrew Garfield. And I've got to be honest, Andrew Garfield is one of my favourite actors today, and I absolutely love his depiction of Spider-Man. I do think that his performance is really great, especially when he's actually in the suit. I do kind of understand that criticism when he's as Peter Parker, because I do feel like he does seem a little bit more confident than you really would expect him to be. He does seem a little bit too cool. It's a really weird backhanded sort of criticism. It's such a strange thing to say, but I do kind of understand where people are coming from, because the Peter Parker that I think most people are more familiar with is not somebody who's like skateboarding down the hallways of schools after the teachers told him not to. That's not him. But I do like his awkwardness. I do like how he doesn't really seem very comfortable in his own skin. Like he's quite twitchy and quite he can't really seem to stand still long enough. And I think that's something that I do like seeing as the movie progresses, because he is quite twitchy quite early on, especially when this girl at the school starts talking to him and he seems like really like and then contrast that with like towards the end of the movie where he's standing up straight, he's not moving, he's a lot more confident, a lot more himself, and I just really like how they did that, and I think that was something that Andrew Garfield brought to it. I'm going to try my best not to just constantly compare this to the other two interpretations, so all I'll say in regards to the actual Peter Parker stuff and Spider-Man stuff is I feel like as an actor, as a performer, I think Andrew Garfield's probably my favourite, but I don't think that the individual stories are as strong as the Sam Raimi movies, and I don't think that the overall story arc, the overall character arc that Peter Parker's gone through is anywhere near as good as the MCU story, which has managed to build off of everything that's happened beforehand. So I hope that sort of gives you an idea of my sort of mindset when it comes to the movie depictions of Spider-Man. But I don't think anyone's going to argue with me when I say that Into the Spider-Verse is the best one. When it comes to the rest of the cast for this film, I really think that everyone is genuinely great in this movie. You've got some really big names part of this, like Martin Sheen and Sally Fields as Aunt May and Uncle Ben. I love their chemistry. I love how they, to me, sort of feel more like what Aunt May and Uncle Ben really are. You know, even though the other versions have had some good moments, I do feel like this sort of feels a bit more believable. They really do feel like a couple that have been together for a very long time, like the meatloaf thing. The way that Peter interacts with not only Aunt May but Uncle Ben as well, it is very honest and believable, and I do really like that depiction. I love the conversations that they have because it does feel very natural. It feels like something that you would really talk about, and I think that the performances really do sell how realistic it can be. And then when it comes to the love interests in this movie, I like that they decide to do a different character altogether, because yes, we have had Gwen in the past. She did appear in Spider-Man 3, played by Bryce Dallas Howard, and in this version we have Emma Stone. I'll just go and say I honestly prefer her to Mary Jane Watson, because I just think that the way that they handled her, whether it was the performance or the way that she was written, I think that the way that she is with Peter definitely works a lot better, because it feels like they really do have a genuine connection and chemistry, and I feel like the relationship does feel very realistic. It definitely helps that Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone were actually together around about this time, so it does come across, it does work very well, it does benefit their performance and the way that those two characters interact. It definitely helps that you've got Mark Webb behind this, who has done a lot of rom-com movies in the past, so having that background has definitely sort of enhanced this, and the romance is very prominent, and I do feel like it does work very well for this kind of movie. Emma Stone is genuinely fantastic. I really love her performance because she really does sell this role very well. I think that she really does hold her own against a lot of the other characters in this, because it would have been so easy for them to have just done another damsel in distress, but they actually make her a lot more self-reliant, and she's a lot more hands-on when it comes to the situation, because she actually does play her part in helping to try and defeat the lizard. So I really do appreciate that they do try something different, and it does work, and I feel like she's probably the strongest out of the different love interests that they have had in these movies. I really do love the casting for this film. I do feel like everyone does work very well for their roles. I think Dennis Leary as Captain Stacy, I think I definitely prefer this version over the one that we had in Spider-Man 3. Even though I did like that performance, I do think this one feels a lot more in line with who Captain Stacy really is. Even Chris Zilker, who plays Flash Thompson, I feel like this is the best interpretation of Flash Thompson that we've had. He definitely feels like there is a lot more subtlety to that depiction than you really would think. I mean, they've sort of loosely sort of dealt with it a little bit in the MCU, but they haven't really gone into it too much. I feel like this one definitely does have those elements if you look out for them. Again, I really do think that this is the best interpretation of Flash. I also find it kind of funny that this is the second movie that Irfan Khan's been in where one of the main characters is Richard Parker. Now this is a Spider-Man movie, so of course we need to have a villain, and this time we have Rhys Ifans playing Dr. Curt Connors, aka the Lizard. I've talked a bit about his character in the past when I did a ranking video all about the different Spider-Man villains. A lot of those points do still stand. I do feel like he is a great character. I do love what they do with him and his story and his general motivation. I do feel like it is something that everyone can relate to. I think Rhys Ifans is a really good choice for this role. He is very different to the version that we have had in the past. I do feel like he does work very well for this one. The only issue that I really have with him is more when he actually becomes the Lizard, and some of the earlier stuff with him as well, because I feel like he's meant to be like a really friendly guy quite early on, and then that makes his change quite a lot more scarier. This isn't what you expect from him. And it also makes the battles between him and Spider-Man quite interesting, because Spidey can't really hurt him because inside that it's his friend. The biggest issue for me is that Rhys Ifans' portrayal, he does kind of come across as a little bit sinister early on, even when he's trying to be friendly, because there's a scene where Peter goes to Dr. Connors' house and the two of them are having a chat, and it's supposed to be all about like rediscovering Peter's past and Richard Parker and Mary Parker's history with him as well. But the way that Rhys Ifans sort of plays it, especially when Peter sort of has a clue to this thing called the decay rate algorithm, which is a thing called cross-species genetics, which is like what Dr. Connors is trying to do. I'm really rambling here, sorry guys. He comes across as a little bit sinister in that moment, because it just sort of seems like it's like, I can now do this, and it's I don't know if it works for me as well as I feel like it could have. I do like the character, I do love the motivation behind him, and if you've seen the deleted scenes, which are really worth a look, I feel like it really adds a lot to his character, and I think if they'd left those scenes in, he would be one of the best villains. But as it stands in the movie that we get, his motivation is great, the performance is great, I love the setup and the build up, but it's the actual payoff that's rather weak. Even though I think the Lizard is a great character, and I do love how he looks, I think that he sounds great, I think the design of him is actually not bad. I just feel like it's such a quick change for him to have gone from like this really nice guy into, okay, now I'm going to turn everybody into lizards because why not? I remember when they first announced that the Lizard was going to be in this, and I remember thinking like, what is it that they're going to make him sort of look like? Is he going to look like a raptor or something, or like a T-Rex or something like that? And I really was a bit concerned about what direction they were going to be going with him, because I'd seen the concept art from Spider-Man 2 from Sam Raimi movies, and he looked really creepy and monstrous, and I really would have liked to have seen that version actually in live action, but I don't think the kids would have liked it. I actually don't mind the design for him in this movie. I do like how it kind of does look a lot like his early appearances in the comics. I would have liked a bit more of a snout from him. I would have liked him to have looked a little bit more lizardy. I would have liked to have seen him in the lab coat a bit more. You know, he's in it for like one scene and very briefly in another bit, but that's all you really see of it, him actually in it. I would have just loved to have seen him actually like properly wearing it. I don't think they would have been able to have really sort of pulled off the purple pants as well. I mean, they've managed to do it with the Hulk a few times, but I just don't think that it would have fit very well within this rather realistic world. I do think it is quite subtle that on the arm that he's regrown, he only actually has like 3 fingers. It just sort of adds to that sort of reptilian side to him. It's just really subtle. I do love those little details. And then when it comes to the Spider-Man costume, I actually don't mind this one. I know it's a controversial thing to say, especially considering what the costume looks like in Amazing Spider-Man 2 and all the stuff that we've had in the MCU, but I actually did quite like this costume when I properly saw it within the movie, because I remember seeing the pictures when they released it initially, and I just didn't like it. It just looked so strange with the way that it was just all streamlined. There was no sort of like belt area. But then I saw the web shoes and I was like, ooh, they're actually doing this. And it really does add to the more sciencey elements of this movie. And I do like that you can see that it is a lot more homemade, and it does look like something that potentially somebody could make. And having said that, you actually do see him making it as well, so it does work very well. It sort of looks quite alien and quite creepy, and I like how it is sort of incorporated with a lot of real world elements, because you see him kind of researching like how different costumes are made, the way that he's able to like move through the air a lot quicker. I like the way that they use sunglasses for the eyepieces. It does work quite well. I do actually quite like the suit. I was a teenager when these movies did come out, so when I did see this costume for the first time, and well, within the movie, and sort of like all the trainers and everything, I was like, that's kind of cool, that's kind of cool. So I do have a bit of a love-hate sort of relationship with a few elements of the costume. I do like it overall, but I wouldn't necessarily say it was my favourite. That being said, I absolutely hate his early costume in this movie, because he just looks like Phone Jacker. It just looks awful. Because a big part of what the early costume, the early like homemade costume is meant to kind of be, is like the precursor to what his eventual costume is going to look like, and his early costumes looks nothing like a Spider-Man costume in any way, shape or form. I don't see why it is that he decides to go with the direction that he does for his costume in this one, when that's what the early suit is. You could see it in the Tobey Maguire one, you can definitely see it in the MCU, but not in this one. When it comes to the story for this movie, this is where things really get quite complicated for me, because when it comes to the new stuff, when it comes to a lot of the stuff that they're kind of bringing into this that we've never really seen before, it can be genuinely really good. I dare say amazing, but it doesn't quite hit the heights that a lot of the other movies really have, and one of the reasons for that is because it retreads so much old ground that we've already seen 10 years earlier. We've seen the being bitten by a spider, it's been done before. We've seen Uncle Ben being killed, it's been done before. There's all these different elements that have been done before, right down to like the villain having a voice inside his head. It's been done before in the other movies. It's up to you, it's your preference which version you prefer of this. I prefer how the original one did it, personally, because I feel like that is more definitive of how the origin story really is. But there are a lot of elements of this one that I do like. I quite controversially kind of like the way that they handle the "with great power comes great responsibility" line, because I feel like it resonates a little bit more, and I think it sounds a little bit more meaningful, especially since it's not necessarily coming from Uncle Ben, it's coming from Richard Parker instead. I also similarly don't mind that Peter really starts becoming Spider-Man is more through like a revenge story, because it does separate it really enough from the Sam Raimi movies. It still has that same sort of motivation, because Peter is becomes Spider-Man for selfish reasons, which is Spider-Man. It's quite a complicated thing for me. I don't mind it, but it could have been a little bit better. But as I said, when it becomes more its own thing and when it takes its own direction, I feel like it does work very well, and I do feel like its strengths are really good, especially when it comes to like the more emotional scenes and a lot of the sequences between characters, because this feels a lot more grounded and a lot more realistic. There is a darker tone, it's a lot grittier as well. It definitely feels like this is a lot more closer to our world, and it does play very well into this kind of story that they are trying to tell. I like that when Uncle Ben's died, one of the things that they actually do is they focus on the actual grief element of it a bit more. Rewatching it doesn't really bother me, but I do remember feeling quite emotional actually seeing that within context of the movie, even though everyone knows that story. The fact that it did make me feel something, it really does lend quite well to how good the writers and the performances of Sally Field and Andrew Garfield really sell this. But I do feel like it does feel almost like two movies in a way, because you have like this emotional character built drama where Peter's trying to uncover the mystery around his parents, and then it turns into Spider-Man versus the Lizard, and those two don't really match up as well as you'd think, because it feels like a very different movie towards the end of the film than what it was at the start, which, you know, it can be like quite a natural progression of things, but they barely sort of touch on a lot of the themes that they had in the first half, so it does feel a little bit disconnected. Those deleted scenes do kind of help add to that a bit more, but they're not in the movie, so it does feel a little bit detached. And going back to actually talking about like stuff that they have repeated, I do feel like the stuff that they have done before, especially when he's becoming Spider-Man, I think it is really fast, and I do feel like they could have just slowed it down a bit more and just allowed the character to really sort of come through a lot more, because it is just so fast, and it's just like, it seems almost aware that you know this story by now. It doesn't really matter too much, so it just sort of speeds through everything to get to, you know, him in the costume on building. And I just feel like they could have either held the brakes on or just done something a little bit different. All the way back in 2012 or 2011 when they started really started marketing this movie, it might have been 2012, but when they started actually marketing this movie, one of the biggest selling points for this film was that it was going to be talking about the untold story, which was all about Peter's parents, and they barely actually focused on it. Like, that's what I mean when I say like the first half sort of focuses on that and then it just sort of forgets about it. I feel like if they had just focused on that mystery, I think it could have been a lot more interesting. Chances are you've probably seen this movie, but if you haven't, I am going to get into spoilers, so you're being warned. They don't actually address what happened. They mention the plane crash, they mention all the stuff that supposedly happened, but they don't really give reasons why. That's all left for the next one, or the next 3, 4, however many sequels they're planning. And I feel like what they should have done is have that story actually contained in this, and have a definitive answer in this story, and have Dr. Connors play a big part of that. And the way around that would be to not redo the origin story again, because we've already seen it. I think what they should have done with this is have the movie start where Spider-Man is already established, he's already been around for like 6 to 12 months, and people are sort of aware of him. The police aren't really too happy with him being around, so there is a bit of conflict, so you can sort of have it already at a point where we have sort of got like a classic Spidey in a way, but he's still learning, he's still developing, and then you can bring the Lizard into things and you can have the parent story be front and centre, so you don't necessarily need to retread things that have been done in the past. I do actually have quite a lot of ideas and theories around where this movie could have gone from and where the sequel ultimately could have led to, and you know, none of that happened. When I get around to reviewing Amazing Spider-Man 2, I will talk about that, but I probably won't be too in depth when I actually do talk about it. So if you do actually want to hear my ideas for what they should have done, let me know in the comments and I'll try and do like a separate video so I can just dedicate all my time to doing that. That being said, there was actually one thing that I was sort of thinking might happen in this movie, which ultimately didn't. All the trailers were showing how dark this movie was going to be, and they were showing a lot of the monstrous side of things with like the lizard, and the way that they were sort of showing Peter's transformation, because he definitely has a lot more bug elements this time around, like to the point where he even catches a fly in midair and there's a moment where it looks like he's going to eat it. I actually thought that we may end up seeing the Man Spider making an appearance. I thought that the transformation was actually going to be like quite slow over the movie, to the point where the climax was going to be Man Spider versus Lizard, which I think would have been very interesting to have seen play out. But you know, ultimately we got a very standard Spider-Man movie, but I feel like that could have been something really interesting, and again it would have helped separate that from what we've seen in the past. One thing that is really good in this movie is the action. I really do like how it is handled, and there's a really good mixture of different action sequences through this. We've got some probably free running chase sequences which look great, especially considering it is all practical. I've seen the videos of the stuntmen doing their thing, so it is really great how they're able to do that. And then we've got like the bigger, more fantastical fights between Spidey and the Lizard. They're really great. I do love how they sort of adapt their abilities to their environment. The school fight, we've got Spidey basically like webbing the Lizard up in like the hallway, and he's like wrapped in like a cocoon and all sorts, and it looks great. I think that it works really well. It really shows off how fast these characters are and how agile they are. And a big part of that is through the effects. Although they aren't perfect, I do think that the effects are really good for this movie, and they still look really good today. A lot of it does focus on like the Lizard, so he is a motion capture character. There is a lot of detail that has gone into him, and he does look really great. There are some shots where you will think that maybe he might be real. Like there's one shot during the final battle where they're on the tower and the Gnarly device has gone off, and there's like a bright flash of light. That shot of the Lizard when he's right behind Peter, he looks so real that it actually kind of freaked me out the first time I saw it, because I was convinced that it was actually a person in the mask. All the effects throughout the movie are really good. Some of them do look a little bit cartoony, but when it comes to like a lot of the close-ups, it does look really good. I think that it really helps show how fast the characters can be as well, because they can get them to move a lot more unnaturally, and they can kind of get them to actually sort of be a bit more like how their comic book counterparts are. Because like, if you ever do read the comics, especially like the Steve Ditko, John Romita stuff, Spidey does have a very ridiculously flexible way of moving, and they're able to adapt that really well into this, and I feel like this is definitely how Spidey does move. And even though it is expanded a lot more in the second one, it is something that I will talk about in that one, I do feel like the web slinging really does work really well in this one. I love how it looks, and it is so dynamic and well realised. And when it comes to the music, this time taken over from Danny Elfman and Christopher Young is the late James Horner. I think this is a very underrated theme, especially for Spider-Man, because this is absolutely beautiful. I absolutely love this soundtrack. It's funny that I have mentioned Danny Elfman, because I remember thinking when I first heard it that it does sound a lot like things like Edward Scissorhands. It sounds great. I really do love how it sounds. It does work very well for the movie. I would have liked a bit more of like the electric guitar stuff, especially like during like the action sequence, because that to me sounds like what the Spidey theme really is. But I really do love this theme. It does sound absolutely beautiful, and I love how it does elevate a lot of the scenes it is in. I don't feel like it's as memorable as the Danny Elfman theme or the Michael Giacchino theme, but it really works well for this interpretation of the character. The biggest issue is that they get rid of it in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and I'm really annoyed with that, because this to me is the sound of Andrew Garfield Spidey. I would have liked the Lizard to have had a theme of his own, and I do feel like there are a few characters that don't really have too much of a theme. There is a bit of a theme with Peter and Gwen, but that's really it. So I would have liked to have had a bit more varied themes throughout it, rather than just like more subtle tones that sort of go throughout it. But it is really good, and it is worth listening to if you get the chance. There's also a lot of songs that were included in this, and they do fit very well into the scenes that they are included in, but there's nothing really stand out. There's nothing on par with like Hero or anything like that. I don't know whether this was true or not, but I remember some rumour that apparently there was going to be a song called What Happens Now by Cold, and I'd heard it, I'd listened to it. It definitely fits the movie, it does fit the tone and the character, and I got quite excited because they actually sort of mentioned Venom, but it's nothing related to Spider or anything like that. And it is a really good song, and I was quite disappointed that it didn't actually appear in the movie, so I don't know how true it was, whether or not it was supposed to be in this or not. It is a pretty good song, so I'd recommend having a look at it if you get a chance. Overall, I still have a very complicated relationship with this movie, because I remember absolutely loving it when it first came out, to the point where I would have said that yeah, it was the best Spider-Man movie that's ever been made. But maybe it was more my excitement that was really sort of getting in the way of that. I don't know, over the years I have started noticing a lot more flaws with it, and I have noticed a few more problems, especially when it comes to the contrast between the different versions of the movies that we have had. It does repeat a lot of similar elements. I do feel like it needs to back off of that. It can come across as very studio mandated at times, which is a very dangerous thing, especially if you're familiar with the Fantastic Four at all. You're sort of aware of like what studio mandate really sort of is. It definitely feels like there are elements that the studio sort of throws in here, like the mystery around the parents not actually being completed, and they just save it for the next one. And of course the big tease about like, did you tell the boy about his father? It does feel very tacked on, and I do feel like this should have been like a very self-contained movie. But the performances are really good, the music is great, the effects, the action, the way that it's directed, I love the editing for it. It really is a good movie, but it's just held down from the fact that this is just kind of a repeat of what we'd already seen. And by far this is one of the hardest ones to review, because it is almost impossible to not compare it to the Sam Raimi movies because of how connected it was to them. But as it stands, I do think that this is a very solid movie. I just feel like there are definitely elements that they could have improved or changed. Honestly, my rating for this movie is an 8 out of 10. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say that this is an amazing movie, but there are amazing elements in it, and I do think that this is definitely worth a look if you are a Spider-Man fan. It's kind of funny how many times I've actually mentioned the MCU throughout this review, considering I believe that this movie was originally meant to be set within the MCU when it was originally getting developed, because when they were creating the Avengers, which came out a few months before this, I believe what they were trying to do when they were creating the CG model for New York in the Avengers was they wanted to incorporate the Oscorp Tower from this movie. It ultimately didn't happen because I believe the design for the building just took so long that Disney basically just went, look, we're moving on. I do feel like there are definitely elements that were meant to sort of play into the MCU in some way. I mean, to back this up, Kevin Feige, who produces all the MCU movies, was an executive producer on this. And I feel like it answers one thing that a lot of people have questioned. Why are there so many cranes in this one sequence? And I think the answer to that is because they were repairing the city after the alien invasion. I think that is why there were so many cranes in that scene, and I think that is the biggest clue that this was originally meant to be the MCU. But things changed and we got another reboot altogether, so whether that worked out for the better or not, that's down to you guys. So that's all I've really got to say for today's video. I might have gone on a bit longer than I really wanted to for this one, but there's a lot to say, so let me know what you guys thought about the movie. Do you like it? Do you not? Where do you rank it when it comes to the Spider-Man movies? Do you prefer this? Do you not? Let me know down in the comments. Please like and subscribe. Make sure you share this video out as well if you can. Be sure to hit the notification button to actually keep up to date on everything that's going on this channel. You can also find me on Facebook, where I basically update you on everything that's going on over here, as well as giving you little previews of the thumbnails and things. As always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you if you've stayed this long as well, and I'll see you next time on Rewind Reviews. See you guys.